This is an award talk for the ISCON 2023 Best Paper Award for the paper Dress is a Fundamental Component of Person Perception, which is authored by myself and Eric Heyman. In one of Cinderella's most iconic scenes, the fairy godmother transforms Cinderella's clothing from rags into a beautiful ball gown. She's now fit for the royal ball, and those in attendance greet her with awe rather than the disdain she would have faced arriving in her old, threadbare clothes. At its core, this scene is about the transformative power of dress. One outfit changes others' impressions of Cinderella, and she lives happily ever after. Though most would agree that dress substantially influences perceptions and outcomes, this topic has received relatively little attention in social psychology, raising questions regarding the validity of person perception models that do not incorporate target dress. Now, this is what the paper is about, but this is a relatively short talk, so rather than try to fully lay out this argument, I'm mostly going to focus on reasons why dress and person perception is a historically neglected topic, and how dress might help us understand the processes underlying person perception. Then I'll use these points as a vehicle for some broader thoughts that Eric and I kept in mind as we wrote this paper, and these thoughts are about what we study in social cognition and social psychology more broadly. So what are these reasons for the neglect of dress and person perception? Reason one is high theoretical complexity with a lot of emergent properties. Reason two is dress's incompatibility with being studied via traditional methodology. And reason three is that dress is an important mode of expression and communication for marginalized groups specifically, which means that the people setting the trajectory of person perception decades ago may not have fully appreciated its importance. Okay, reason one, high complexity and emergent properties. It's no coincidence that many fashion design people draw on Gestalt principles when considering the design of an outfit or even an article of clothing. And this is because the meaning of any given article of clothing varies quite a bit depending on what else it's worn with, who it's worn by, when and where it's worn, and so forth. For example, take a pair of Doc Martens. What does a Doc Marten mean? Well, this may have been quite different in the 60s and 70s when Doc Martens were popular combat boots worn by a lot of folks in the skinhead or punk scenes. In the last couple decades, Doc Martens have seen a lot of uptake in queer communities as a means of queer signaling to either complete a mask outfit or round out a feminine outfit to give it a more androgynous vibe. And even more recently than this, in the last decade or so, Doc Martens have really hit the mainstream, so maybe they don't carry the same information they used to. So here it's really the case. So with dress, one of the interesting things about it is that the meaning of dress is really contextually dependent, perhaps even more so than other topics in social psychology. And this means that the study of dress doesn't lend itself well to the uncovering of psychological universals, which historically have carried a lot of weight in our field. The second reason for the neglect of dress and person perception is this incompatibility with traditional methodology. In a talk 4 years ago, Moin Syed argued that its 2x2 designs all the way down, social psychology's over-reliance on experiments needlessly restricts diversity in the field. And here the main argument is that there's a very large universe of all possible social psychological questions we could ask, a smaller subset of this universe, including those that can be addressed via experiments, and an even smaller subset still of those questions that can be addressed by 2x2 designs, the old gold standard of our field. The argument Moyne makes is that it seems clear that methods are driving the substantive focus of the field, and when you imagine what it's like trying to study dress with the different pants and shirts and shoes and people wearing the clothing, it's likely that dress is one of the big casualties of this effect. And then finally, reason three is that dress is a particularly important form of expression and communication for marginalized groups. And here, we're going to peek into a conversation between Avery Truppelman and Don Letts on the podcast Articles of Interest.
There's this myth that it's frivolous or unproductive to care about how you look. Clothing and fashion get trivialized a lot. But think about who culturally gets associated with clothing and fashion. Young people, women, queers, and people of color. Groups of people who, historically, haven't been listened to have expressed themselves on their bodies, through their style, their hair, their tattoos, their piercings, and what they wear.
You've got to understand, black working class kid, that's all the only way we had to express ourselves was through the music we listened to and the clothes we wore.
This is Don Letts, a legendary DJ and filmmaker and creator of the documentary Punk Attitude.
I've always engaged with the look. Because, in black culture, we've been forced to express ourselves in a very punk rock way. In what is a very white world, we've only been left the fringes to operate within. Do you understand? So that's forced us to do.
So if you grant this idea that dress is more important to those in marginalized communities, then it follows that if we look at the underrepresentation based on race, gender, and socioeconomic status in high power positions in psychology, it stands to reason that topics like dress may be relatively neglected or not included as much. And these 3 points really lead to thought number 1, which is that we should reflect on what we're studying specifically. So research priorities are certainly shifting to focus more on things like generalizability, non-experimental methods, and positionality. This is great, and we are definitely refining how we study things via the use of more diverse samples, mixed methods, and positionality statements. But I think it's just as important for us to take a step back and reflect on what we study and whether limited time and money and journal space should be reallocated to different kinds of topics. So in the case of person perception, I would argue that maybe we spend too much time studying faces and too much money, and we should study other things like dress and bodies and posture and so forth. Now, you could argue, well, this is all fine and well, but is dress really telling us anything new about mechanism or process? And in social cog, we care about these things quite a bit. And I would argue that yes, it does. If we consider the way that target face and body versus target dress function in the context of person perception, we can think of face and body as being more stable, trait-like, and resistant to change, compared to target dress, which is more malleable, state-like, and less resistant to change. A couple things follow from this that are important. One of these is that target face and body have a weaker causal relationship to target's cognition, i.e. they're not choosing their face or body based on their mood or goals or motives that day, but they might choose their dress in this way, so there's a stronger causal relation to their cognition. And then finally, because we can't just shift our face and bodies around, there are weaker contextual norms around what kind of face or body you should have compared to target dress, where the norms might vary quite a bit depending on whether you're at a wedding or a barbecue or the gym. And one of the grad students I'm working with, Sean Yi, presented a poster earlier on this exact thing. And this really leads to thought too, that we should be fine with describing phenomena first. Studying novel phenomena can clarify how psychological processes unfold. You may not know how they're going to do this, but if they explain a lot of variance in meaningful outcomes, there's a good chance that they do, so we can identify these phenomena, and then we can describe them and gradually integrate what we find into our theories and models. I think this is a really important shift to make. Now, the last point that I want to make has to do with what it was like doing a lit review for this paper. Eric and I identified 4 main themes or areas where dress likely plays a strong role in person perception, and the lit review for these categories when we got to talking about dress research was interesting. In social categories, we drew quite a bit on work about sexual identity and sexual signaling, not necessarily in psychology. For cognitive states, we talked a lot about, we talked some from a socio-historical perspective about respectability politics in Black communities in North America and how this translates more recently to this idea of Black armor, which is wearing formal wear to deflect stereotypes of threat. For status, we got to talk about sumptuary laws in 15th century England, as well as odd patterns in economics, such as Veblen curves for luxury goods. And then for aesthetics, we got to talk about things like ideas featured in fashion and lifestyle magazines and whether these translate to people's aesthetic tastes. And this really leads to a final thought that I want to leave with you, which is that for novel topics, we just have to be okay with accepting less theoretical background. Casting a wider net to study novel ideas requires us to accept theory that is built, one, on more non-psychological work, and B, two, on fewer psychological findings, at least during these early stages. And this is important because otherwise novel work may be rejected for what appears to be weak theoretical justification when really a given area of study is just in its nascent form, and we have to be okay with that. One model that I want to highlight here is a socio-historical model by Ryan Lay, Emily Foster Hansen, and Jin Go. They wrote a great paper last year laying out the idea that for some things we may need to draw on sociology, history, and anthropology to gain clarity. So I'm going to leave you with these three thoughts and close with a quote from legendary costume designer Edith Head, who once stated, "You can have anything you want in life if you dress for it." I hope you're convinced of the importance of dress and person perception, and I hope you check out the paper if you want to learn more. And I also hope that some of my general thoughts on what we study and value as a science are helpful in some way. With that, I'd like to thank my collaborator on this project, Eric Heyman, as well as Shaviv Harry and Hannah Schiller for helping with the lit review. And this is where you can find me, and this is where you can find the paper. Thanks so much.